Our next two presenters come to us from Bucharest, Romania. I mean, one of them here in person, one of them virtually. Professor Clara Volintiru teaches at the Bucharest University of Economic Studies. I got a degree there also, but they raised the standards after I left. It was much harder. Yeah. And obtained her PhD from the London School of Economics. She's also the director of the German Marshall Fund in Romania and has worked as a consultant for international organizations such as the World Bank, European Commission, Eurofund, and others. Professor Camelia Crisan teaches at the National School of Political Science and Public Administration in Bucharest, where she also earned a PhD. They both have leadership positions in Project Romania 2030, which is our strategic, the think tank that is our strategic partner for Europe. Clara.
Thank you so much, Dan, and thank you everyone for having us here in this fantastic initiative. I feel very privileged and humbled to be invited in person in this fantastic institution and to talk about these important issues, not just in theoretical terms, and you know, my deepest appreciation for the presentations that went ahead before I did, but also in practical terms. And I think this challenge that Dan presented to us to link the overall arching figures of the statistical analysis to the in-country context and causal mechanisms was very close to my heart. And thank you so much for giving us this opportunity. So we're like in a sort of a kind of a funny situation because I'm just one person presenting here together with my colleague Camelia Crisan in Bucharest online, whom I'm saluting, and she's gonna step up in one stage of our presentation, but we're actually three authors in the chapter, so I'm the lucky one to be here with you all today. What I would like to add in conceptual terms, because of course I'm an academic, but I'm also a policy advisor and let's say an operational person in our grant-making activities in Romania through GMF. In theoretical terms, as a long-time or short-term scholar, but long-term student, I faced the same conundrum that was mentioned this morning. I think the first contact with the intellectual debate on what comes first, economic prosperity or democracy. What comes first, democracy or the quality of governance? And this was the core of our struggles to uncover the foundational texts. For me, it was Lipset and Jaworski in terms of the debate. You have Acemoglu and Danny Roderick that was already mentioned. So there are very, very big minds that have worked on these issues. And of course, again, it's humbling for us to try to make our contribution. But again, some empirical terms can lay a better understanding of the region. My presentation will focus on the specific region of Central and Eastern Europe. That's an area that we've covered again, in theoretical and empirical terms. I think, unfortunately, it's an area that has grown to a status of international attention, and it is an opportunity for us as scholars to step up to the task of really making sense of what drives societal resilience, what drives democracy, and hopefully what drives prosperity for the population that resides in this conflict-ridden area of the world. Of course, it is Ukraine that is under a horrific war, but the instabilization trajectories are regional. And this is an important factor to be taken into consideration. And I hope our assessment of this virtuous cycle between freedom and prosperity can shed some light. So let's see the context, right? The overlapping security, political, and economic challenges in Eastern Europe. Just to give you the heads up, we're going to have three short components in my presentation. One is context, two is the three trajectories of prosperity, in my opinion, in our opinion, for Central and Eastern Europe, and third, brief conclusions. Now, the road towards freedom and prosperity in these overlapping regions, some of which are part of the European Union, some of which are at the frontier of the European Union, the road towards freedom and prosperity requires in our opinion, a clear strategic engagement from Western allies in the European Union and the transatlantic community. And this is linked to the causal mechanism between freedom and prosperity. You open up your markets, you open up your country, you get huge multiplication effects in terms of trade and investment, and then you can deliver prosperity to and stability to your population. But this involves the linking of immediate responses to the war and the crisis in the region with a clear long-term prospect of development for the region as a whole, again. And this is linked to the previous presentation when we talk about the fact that it is only democratic values that allow you to make these long-term investments, right? Because it is about a shared value process at the end of the day. And finally, what it also requires is scaling up the effort from security engagements to economic partnerships that deliver. The whole, stabilization through investments thesis that goes on at the moment. Now, there are three trajectories, but probably we will change them in the chapter to pathways because that's more consistent with the other contributions to Dan's book and Joseph's. There is a clear growth trajectory in the region through the process of European integration. And this is essentially the epitome of openness, right? The European integration has allowed for the integration of markets in Central and Eastern Europe. It has also allowed for large transfers of capital through the way of the structural funding. And those transfers of capital have permitted, let's say, local conditions to become more favorable for foreign direct investors. So this is, in a nutshell, the developmental model that Central and Eastern Europe has gone through over the past 2 decades. But what we have to uncover now, today, after the COVID crisis, during the war in Ukraine, is a growth trajectory through a new economic model. And that growth trajectory through a new economic model is searched or developed everywhere around the world. It's not just for the region. Every country tries to reassemble the way it constructs its developmental path. And some may oppose it to a protectionist versus liberal stance, but in effect, these national development models, like Romania is developing, like Ireland has been developing, like Spain is developing, these national growth or development models are focused on coordinating the national capabilities with international context and regional markets. So it's not about closing or opening up, but in adapting and adjusting. And within the specific context of the European Union, what we find is a model of flexibility and conditionality. So we give you money on the condition that you open up your processes, your institutions, and your markets, but how you choose to direct that investment money is up to you. You need to do your own country assessment. And this flexibility plus conditionality model could be reflected in many of the international organizations' approach to development. But again, this requires a national economic model discussion, debate, and it has to be evidence-based. And this is where your amazing index comes into role. And finally, and this is where my colleague will step in immediately or in a couple of minutes, is the growth trajectory where freedom is an enabling condition for prosperity. And we have plenty of examples from the COVID crisis in Romania and the current situation in Ukraine, where you see the civil society stepping up in co-designing the public processes, but also local communities, local development alliances, like we call them, through different examples in Central and Eastern Europe. Before I give the floor to my colleague Camelia in a second, I would just like to highlight some different indexes that we've developed at the subnational level in Romania. Because in the case of the European integration, you see a doubling, a fantastic growth process for Central and Eastern Europe since joining the European Union. You have a doubling in value-added production from close, for example, in Romania, from close to 100 billion euros to 215 billion euros. You have a doubling of exports from 40 billion to 89 billion. You have a growth dynamics of GDP approximately 3 to 5 percentage points. But what you still find is large subnational disparities. And what this means is that the growth trajectory through European integration has been largely concentrated in a couple of leading urban centers. And this poses a very large challenge for the credibility of the freedom/prosperity model. Because if people don't really see the benefits in their daily lives and local communities, then what's it all about? This is an index that we've produced for the Aspen Institute in Romania since 2016. And what's interesting is that we see secondary cities like Cluj becoming even more attractive for international business and investors due to their focus on innovation and local developmental alliances with academic brain trusts, like Dan called them. Now, a second index that we've developed with the Aspen Institute Romania and the German Marshall Fund last year is a local resilience index for Romania and Moldova, where if we look at one of our pillars, which is the socioeconomic pillar of local resilience in counties in Romania and Moldova, what you find is that the access to basic services and the socioeconomic policies are largely the same across the territory because they are generally nationally driven or internationally recommended. But what you don't find is equal economic opportunities. And again, this might be counterintuitive. The farther you are from a large urban center, the less economic opportunities you have. But that's a vicious circle where you get outward migration, depopulation, poverty, disinformation permeability, clientelism and distortion of democratic practices, and you waste any chance of consolidating your freedom indexes in those local regions. And finally, again, before I turn to my colleague and I thank her for her patience, it is important to acknowledge what the new economic model would be in the region for Central and Eastern Europe. And here is a very thick table. I apologize. I don't expect you to follow it right away, but I'm sure Dan will share the slides with you. It's a table that we've comprised with my fellow colleagues from different universities in Europe, and it looks at the high value added investments in 3 leading countries in Central and Eastern Europe: Hungary, Romania, and Poland. And why I pinpoint high value added investments, it is because, as the speakers before me have highlighted, this is the key to prosperity in the coming years. We cannot stand aside and wait for the basic manufacturing process to deliver the type of prosperity and multiplication effects that were available 20 years ago. The only chance for countries that are entering a downward spiral to, let's say, escape that trap of impoverishment is based on high value-added investments. And the way you secure high value-added investments is being a really attractive environment in overall terms, especially in all the indexes of the freedom index, right? And there is a very scarce distribution outside the capital cities. For some countries like Poland, there is a better distribution across the territory. Romania has made important steps towards distributing better the high-value investments in its territory. There needs to be, what I mentioned earlier, local developmental alliances. And for that reason, what we've also done with the World Bank in Romania and the German Marshall Fund a couple of years ago was this mutual engagement process. And this is what we're pitching for the Ukraine reconstruction and recovery process as well. You need a co-design structure. You need civil society to be engaged with local authorities, the same way you need local authorities to open up and understand the needs and benefit from the facilitation that civil society organizations can provide. And here, beyond the very narrow figures that we have for the index of mutual engagement in Romanian cities, I also have it for Hungary and Poland. Let me just go back to the overall story and try to make it more humane by turning to my colleague Camelia, who's gonna tell you a little bit about what mutual engagement actually means in real terms. Camelia, you have the floor. So sorry for taking so long.
Thank you, Clara. I'm the storyteller, right?
Yes.
The sociologist who's the storyteller. So data from the Freedom House and other sources show that freedom indicators in Romania have increased in the past years. Now, while some countries in Eastern Europe have shifted towards autocracy, particularly Poland and more so Hungary, Romania has not been in that position. And we believe that that is due to a strong and robust civil society. So what's the story? How has this strong and robust civil society been forged? In our essay, Clara and myself provide more details, but the milestones, in our view, were a combination of fighting for civil and individual rights, the movement for the freedom of internet, for sustainable development and more corporate sustainability and accountability, the hashtag United We Save movement, and against government corruption, hashtag Corruption Kills movement. Hundreds of thousands of people took the streets of Bucharest and other cities and forced at least 2 governments to resign, because the common perception was that even those governments were of the people, they were not led by the people, but by a few corrupt politicians, and they were not for the people, but rather for corporate interest. Another important milestone has happened during the COVID pandemic. Romanian civil society has seen a surge in solidarity and harnessed a broad community effort to support the vulnerable and those in need. Networks have been strengthened, new partnerships have been fostered between state and the civil society, particularly in terms of social innovation, with an association called Code for Romania, an association of volunteers from the IT industry, which created a platform supporting the first aid effort. As a result, in February 2022, when Russia has attacked Ukraine and the response of the Romanian society has been overwhelming in support of the refugees, tools which have been built during COVID times have been redirected for this new purpose. So, local networks of NGOs, which have supported with medicines older people during COVID times, became active collectors of goods and first aid materials to be sent to Ukrainian towns and people in need. So this is, in our view, a clear and easy to expand model for mutual engagement. For this reason, and many others, but this is our thesis in this essay, let's say, a strong, robust, and healthy civil society has proved to be in Romania a main pillar for resilience when the country has been confronted with pro-Russian narratives, for instance, related to the war, with 65% of the population stating that there is no justification for the Russian invasion in Ukraine, and 70% believing in NATO's capacity to defend the country. I will finish by saying that during a field trip I have taken 2 weeks ago in Ukraine, I had the chance to discuss with several NGO representatives there, and they support our view that resources to be spending repairing bridges, buildings, roads, and other type of infrastructure must be equally matched by continuous investment in the strengthening of civil society. And here Romania has a good experience, Ukraine is gaining a good experience, and what we have learned can be transferred and used to the benefit of the Ukrainian and Romanian people when the times will call for it. And that's all for me, and back to you, Clara.
Thank you so much, Camelia. And because I see everyone around me, 5 seconds, 2 main takeaways. In order to strengthen the economic resilience of Eastern Europe, I would propose 2 takeaways. Standing on its own, stabilizing the region through investments, and standing up together, multilateral stabilization measures for the region as a whole, and trilateral engagement with countries in the region, Romania, Ukraine, and Moldova. I will delve deeper in these issues in the chapter, and thank you so much for the opportunity to present here today.